Well, the 43rd century is where everything changes, and you've got to be ready. Welcome back to a Torchwood review, as today I'm going to be taking a look at the latest release as a part of the Torchwood main range. It is, of course, Odyssey, as written by Patrick O'Connor, featuring the return of Claire Rushbrook as Ida Scott from the Doctor Who Series 2 story, The Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit. Of course, most notably as well, this episode sees the debut of the Ood within the Torchwood genre, which is incredibly exciting indeed. This is the first of 3 releases coming out in the back end of 2023, all of which are available to order now on the Big Finish website on both physical CD and digital download. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this review, I'd also just like to mention that Torchwood does of course contain adult material, making some releases not suitable for younger listeners. Although, to be quite honest, I think that Odyssey kind of falls more within the PG rating. There isn't particularly too much within this story that is particularly gruesome or adult in content. There might be the odd mild bit of language in there, and a few rather creepy Ood sentences. But other than that, I would say that this story kind of fits into the more darker Doctor Who story territory. So this episode is of course written by Big Finish newcomer Patrick O'Connor, and as always it's lovely hearing new names come on board. I think that this line of stories in particular is a perfect place to start. The main range has been packed with variety and bold storytelling since its very early days, making it, I think, one of the strongest ranges Big Finish have consistently produced in recent years. But likewise, as you can come to expect, this Torchwood release is far from the streets of Cardiff or Soho or even Victorian England, so it may not be for everyone. Of course, this episode is kind of set around the Torchwood archive, humanity in the distant future, so it's very spacey and Doctor Who-ish. Ida Scott lands on Faber to see her father, Dr. Odysseus Scott, a well-known expert in his field. However, he is suffering from Axobar syndrome, which is slowly affecting his speech and mind, and he is using the gravity on Faber and the weird science surrounding the place as a potential cure, albeit not an approved one by the Empire. For those who don't follow me on social media, you won't be aware, but the arrival of the Ood in Torchwood was incredibly exciting for me. I think I tweeted something like it was the most exciting announcement for Big Finish in 2023, and you know what, I still stand by that, especially after reading the Planet of the Ood Target novelisation, which I've also done a review of recently, so check that out if you're interested. I do coincidentally mention how much of a threat the Ood are and how much potential they have to do something scary with. Within the book itself, they are very calculating, very threatening and sinister, whilst also incredibly sassy, which to me make them absolutely ideal for Torchwood. After all, their debut story within Doctor Who was all about the devil, so they're kind of the perfect mix of sci-fi, but also a little bit of darkness in there as well. And not only that, they do of course have previous outings within Big Finish that have been utterly chilling, such as the creepy phone call making Ood within the War Master series, the Master of Callus box set, which is probably one of the highlights of the range for me. So I suppose I should start off this review with none other than Silas Carlson, the voice of the Ood, and his voice is utterly perfect for audio, as the Ood are so soothing, but also very, very creepy. There are moments within this release where the Ood is distracted by various forces at play, which lead to him uttering very, very weird things, such as "Where are my eyes?", which, as you can expect, is very creepy indeed.
The new mouths scream their warning. So many new mouths to feed. All born screaming, all born hungry. Will she be brave in the face of so many teeth?
They are incredibly weird, aren't they? But so effective. But at the same time, I don't want to mislead. I think it is very easy, judging by the cover art of this release, that this episode is focused around the Ood, and it's about possession. It's not really about the Ood having red eye or anything like that, which is perfect, because why rehash something that we've already seen? Instead, the episode goes down a slightly different route, and as much as I adore the cover art, I think that Sean Longmore has done a superb job. I think it doesn't entirely represent what is seen within the story, although to be honest, that is a theme that the Torchwood main range does have quite a lot, because I think for the most part the vast majority of the stories can't really have on the cover art what is actually within the story, because that probably wouldn't be allowed. So yes, it's not a critique of the actual cover art itself, it's stunning, it's very spacey and cool, but the Ood is more of a supporting character. So instead, Silas Carlson has another role to play, playing Dr. Odysseus Scott, the voice of the Ood and the father of Ida Scott, who we of course all know from Sanctuary Base 6. It appears that she's borrowed a Torchwood ship, presumably from Zachary Cross Flynn, to go see her father who is ill. So I guess if you're going to be technical, Ida is not technically a part of Torchwood, so this is very loosely an actual Torchwood story. I must admit, having the Ood as not particularly a prominent role did disappoint me slightly, but this more limited performance did also make me appreciate those moments that we had with the Ood, and I do like how Patrick has adapted the role to fit the rather unusual psychic and gravity-based sciences going on within this region of space. Their role within the episode is such an important one, but with it being an Ood, it's not particularly overplayed. I think that Patrick writes the sinister gibberish that the Ood says incredibly effectively. Ida is at first surprised that the Ood are present. She makes reference to the events of Sanctuary Base 6, although this isn't particularly taken any further, and personally I think it would have been nice to maybe explore that a little bit more, dealing with Ida's guilt from the story. Of course, after all, the Ood were basically mass murdered within that episode. But that's the thing with Ida as a character, and I think it's intriguing having her as a main protagonist, because a lot seems to go on within Ida's mind, although it all remains very internal. She never particularly lets it out, which is interesting for the audio drama format. So really, before even entering this story, for me personally, this episode had quite a lot to offer. I love the whole design of the Torchwood main range, I adore the concept of the Ood, and Claire Rushbrook, I thoroughly enjoyed her playing Tulachenka in the Robot spin-off series, also released by Big Finish over the past few years. Conveniently, one of my other favourite Big Finish ranges. And when you think about it, it is rather unusual the similarities that we have between these characters that Claire Rushbrook plays, because we have Tulachenka, who is the voice of quite a number of the Vok robots on Kaldor. Then you have Ida Scott, whose father is the voice of the Ood, both of which played by Claire Rushbrook, both of them in the distant future, and both of them kind of commentating on humanity going out into space. The vast majority of the episode rather works as a character piece, dealing with the difficult relationship with Ida and Odysseus. I do like how this thread runs throughout the entirety of the story, allowing for the listener to learn more about Ida's backstory, but also her difficult father. It's clear that there is some care between them, but this has been lost in years of bickering and not seeing eye to eye, or Ida not receiving the hope and support a child may expect from a father figure. It's interesting when Thomas Good is brought into the mix as a character, as he acts as the assistant to Odysseus, who naturally supports everything to do with his scientific research. Odysseus does have a few outbursts which I think are a tad more sharp and angry compared to the likes that you'd get within the Doctor Who. But beyond that, I wouldn't say this episode kind of goes fully into that adult territory simply for the sake of it. So I do like how the arguments and tension within this story do feel a little bit more real and troubled. It's clearly something deep-rooted within Ida's past that has affected her throughout the entirety of her life, and because of that I think those emotions do feel a little bit more real compared to Doctor Who, which I think more than often tends to shy away from these more troubling themes between relationships and families and between people. I do tend to think that Doctor Who, especially in recent years, has been rather sugar-coated. I have in fact listened to this story a number of times because I didn't quite know what to make of it to start with, and I think that that is definitely the right thing to do if you have the time to do so. Due to its sheer difference between other Torchwood stories, I do recommend that you listen to this story multiple times simply to get used to the format. If you're coming from the Doctor Who universe side of things, it is a little bit more closer to home, but perhaps if you are an exclusively Torchwood Big Finish listener, this episode is very, very different. Certainly when I'd listened to this episode a second time, it allowed me to appreciate the narrative a lot more. There's lots of subtle references throughout the plot which tie all of the elements within the story together, which I personally found very satisfying. It's nice looking for clues and kind of spotting those little elements early on in the story which tie into the conclusion. Often little things that the Ood kind of mutters make more sense when you are coming back to the story. I also really like how this episode has lots of visual description. It really nicely presents this area of space. I think that Faber is quite an intriguing concept. A place in space with very unusual gravity. It feels very isolated. You can only go to it at certain points when the gravity is swaying in certain directions. The script and soundscape all do a great job of making this place feel incredibly treacherous, and I particularly like the metaphors to the sea, with the gravity being a tide which goes in and out, making it safe to travel or not. And in particular, when you're the likes of Ida Scott, who has a troubled relationship with her father, when she wants to leave, it's not exactly easy to do so. I also think that these more treacherous kind of elements of space and showing space habitation to be not as swish and cool portrayed within other Doctor Who stories that are present within the future. Everything isn't slick and perfect. In fact, there's lots of things that can go wrong, lots of variables. I think that again, that kind of ties this episode back to Doctor Who Series 2, The Impossible Planet and The Certain Pit, because that once again explored very sciencey themes with black holes and spaceships going in and out of them and everything being destroyed. Which, speaking of that story, Blair Mowat has been really clever scoring this one, blending the tunes of the regular Torchwood audio with the long, whiny but lovely tones of The Impossible Planet. It really makes the story stand out, it feels different to other Torchwood episodes, and it makes it feel very spacey and cool. Although a little bit of a gripe, I say it's a little bit of a gripe, it actually got on my nerves quite a lot. We don't have the Torchwood theme at the start of the story, which I don't quite know why they've done that. I don't think its absence kind of helps the story in any way, but I think the episode would have definitely suited having the theme present at the start. It is present at the end because it gives the whole drama an identity, which although it being very different to other Torchwood stories, I still think that it should have that theme at the very beginning to kind of bookend where the episode begins and ends. It just feels right, and not having it there at the beginning just felt a bit odd. I mean, why wouldn't you have that theme present? It just sounds so cool. And believe it or not, it oddly brings me a lot of comfort. I did expect a little bit more from the final act within this story. There are a number of great revelations, and Ida's reaction to them is very believable, although sadly I don't think the story goes as deep as it could have. But then again, maybe that's me trying to make this story into something that it's not. Again, my appreciation for the ending of this episode actually grew after the second listen, and I like the little subtle references which bring the episode full circle. Although at the same time, I think it is very easy to overlook them. So overall, what do I think of Torchwood Odyssey? I will be honest, I was expecting this story to be a little bit different, and I think that it is a bold episode, and it does something of which that I think is very difficult to do, and that is to completely change up the Torchwood genre for the main range and do something which is unlike any other release within the range so far, and I do give it a lot of credit for that, although at the same time, I think it maybe strays a little bit too far from what I love about the Torchwood main range. I would have liked to see this episode maybe explore some darker themes, be a bit more gritty, be a bit more shocking, because there are a few shocking elements within this episode, although it doesn't quite hit the mark of shock that I do expect from the Torchwood main range. I kind of expect at the end of a Torchwood story to sit there in silence and kind of contemplate what on earth I've just listened to, which this episode does do that to an extent, although it doesn't entirely grab my attention. I'm really intrigued as to where this series will go next, what it's going to do with the Ood in the other stories, and personally I would like to see just more of the Ood. I think that they are the big selling points of this story, although it was lovely seeing Claire Rushbrook back as Tublichenko. I think she makes an excellent natural protagonist for this story. I think seeing her encounter a more deadly side of the Ood face on would have added a level to this story, which I think is sadly absent, but it is still enjoyable, and if you want to hear something different from the Torchwood universe, then this episode is definitely for you. But also at the same time, if you are someone who is very comfortable with the Torchwood that they know and love, then be prepared within this one to maybe not quite have your usual Torchwood boxes being ticked. So thank you very much for watching this review. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for regular Big Finish audio drama reviews, of course taking a look and reacting at the latest audio drama releases. Have a nice day, and I shall of course see you all next time.